The monitor beeped a slow, lazy rhythm, a sound that seemed to mock the frantic pounding of my own heart. The harsh antiseptic smell of the hospital room was a stark contrast to the soft, floral perfume I had carefully applied that morning. That morning which felt like a lifetime ago. I had worn my best dress, the navy blue one with the white trim that Leo always said made me look elegant. I had booked the private room at the Oak Room, ordered his favorite cake and even arranged for a small jazz trio. 40 years. 40 years of marriage deserved a celebration worthy of the milestone. But Leo, my Leo, the man whose side I had scarcely left since we were two bright-eyed kids saying I do in a sun-drenched church, was not at his party. He was lying in this sterile bed, his body broken and swathed in bandages, his life bleeding out second by second. And he was not alone. The news had come in a frantic, horrifying call from the state police. There had been an accident on the interstate. A single car veered off the road wrapped around a tree. 2 occupants. Mr. and Mrs. Leo Sterling. My blood had run cold. Mrs. Sterling. That was me. But I was here standing in my kitchen, the phone shaking in my hand. It didn't take long for the grim truth to unravel. He wasn't with some anonymous stranger. He was with her. Vivian. Vivian, the widowed wife of his older brother, Arthur. Vivian, with her perpetually trembling lower lip and eyes that always seemed on the verge of tears. Vivian, who had been his first love, the one who got away, the ghost that had haunted the periphery of our marriage for 4 decades. I stood by his bed now, my hand resting over his cold one. His fingers, once so strong and capable, were limp. The doctor had spoken in hushed, solemn tones. Internal injuries. Massive bleeding. It was only a matter of time. They had given him something for the pain, but he was drifting in and out of consciousness. His eyelids fluttered open. The deep blue eyes I had fallen in love with were clouded with pain and something else. A desperate urgency. His gaze focused on me, and for a heart-stopping second, I saw a flicker of the man I knew. His fingers twitched, then tightened around mine with a surprising final strength. "Clara," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "I'm here, Leo. I'm right here." My voice cracked, tears I had been holding back finally spilling over. This was it. The last words. He swallowed, a painful, visible effort. "Clara, bury me. Bury me with Vivian." The world didn't just stop, it shattered. The air was sucked from the room. I couldn't have heard him right. This was the delirium, the morphine talking. "What?" The word was a choked gasp. "Together," he breathed, his eyes burning with a fervent, dying light. "In the next life. I want to be her husband. I want it to be just us. No one else." A coldness, sharper than any winter chill, seeped into my bones, freezing the tears on my cheeks. For decades. 40 years of shared mornings, of Christmases, of worrying over bills, of holding his hand through his father's funeral, of building a life, a home, a story. I had given him my youth, my energy, my unwavering loyalty. I had chosen him every single day, and it had all meant nothing. The feeling of betrayal was a physical blow, making me tremble from head to toe. A hysterical, broken sound tried to escape my throat, but I choked it down. Wiping my tears with the back of my hand, I looked down at this man, this stranger. A cold, hard laugh escaped my lips, sounding alien even to my own ears. "All right, Leo," I said, my voice unervingly steady. "Die in peace. If there's a next life, I'll make sure you two get your wish." A semblance of a smile touched his bloodless lips. His grip loosened. The monitor emitted a long, continuous tone. The blue line on the screen went flat. I stood there, numb, as nurses and doctors rushed in, a flurry of controlled chaos. I was a statue in the storm, watching them try to pump life back into a shell that had already vacated its premises. I felt nothing. The love, the grief, the pain, it had all been incinerated by the nuclear blast of his final request. The lead doctor turned to me, his face a mask of professional sympathy. "Time of death, 8:17 p.m. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Sterling." I merely nodded. My loss. What exactly had I lost? A man who had never truly been mine? I walked out of the hospital into the cool night air. The world continued on. Cars passed, their headlights cutting through the darkness. People laughed on the street outside a bar. Life was brutally, indifferently moving forward. I got into my car, but I didn't start the engine. I just sat there in the silent, dark parking garage, the echo of his words bouncing around the hollowed-out cavern of my soul. Bury me with Vivian. The anger came then, hot and purifying. It melted the icy numbness. How dare he? How dare he use his last breath to sanctify his affair, to dismiss my entire existence? My decades of sacrifice, of being the reliable one, the sensible one, the dull one, as he had so often implied, were rendered meaningless. He loved her. His love for her was everlasting, unshakable like a rock. A rock. I had been the bedrock of his life, and he'd never even noticed, too busy staring at the pretty, fragile flower growing on the riverbank. The rage was so all-consuming, my vision tinged with red. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I'll make sure you two get your wish, I had promised him. A strange dizziness washed over me. The anger, the grief, the sheer exhaustion of the day. It was too much. The world began to swim, the lights of the dashboard blurring into streaks of color. My head felt incredibly heavy. I slumped forward, my forehead resting on the cool steering wheel. The last thing I was aware of was the sound of a car horn blaring, though I was certain I hadn't pressed it. I opened my eyes to bright, unforgiving sunlight. I was standing. I was in my own kitchen. But it was different. The laminate countertops were there, but they were new, unscratched. The refrigerator was the old avocado green one we'd replaced in the late 80s. The calendar on the wall showed a picture of a fluffy kitten playing with a ball of yarn. The date, September 12, 1980. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a dream. A vivid, cruel, incredibly detailed dream. Clara, are you deaf? The voice. His voice. Leo's voice. It was younger, sharper, laced with an impatience I knew all too well. I turned slowly, my body moving as if through syrup. There he was. Leo. Not the broken man in the hospital bed, but the man from my memories. 35 years old, his dark hair thick and wavy, his face unlined and handsome. He was standing in the doorway of our kitchen, and he wasn't alone. Beside him, clutching a worn leather suitcase and the hand of a small, wiry boy, was Vivian. She was exactly as I remembered her from that time. Delicate, pale, her blonde hair arranged in a soft halo around her face. She looked at me with those wide, doe-like eyes, already shimmering with unshed tears. The boy, Arthur Jr., glared at me with a hostility that seemed far too old for his 6 years. I said, Leo repeated, his voice rising with irritation, my brother's gone. It's not easy for Vivian to raise a kid on her own. I brought them here to live with us. Go clean up the master bedroom so Vivian and AJ can move in. And Vivian's health isn't great. She's still growing. You need to make sure they each get an egg every day. The words. They were the exact same words from a day etched in my memory forever. The day that set our lives on the path to ruin. In my previous life I had rejected him. I had stood my ground, my heart a tight ball of fear and suspicion. I knew their history. I knew Vivian had been forced to marry Leo's ailing brother, Arthur, to be a live-in nurse and comfort to a dying man. I knew the embers of their old romance still smoldered. I had refused, citing propriety and gossip. And my refusal had directly led to tragedy. Vivian had stormed out in a performative huff, right into the path of a neighbor's spooked horse. AJ had been killed instantly. Vivian was seriously injured. The guilt of that moment, however misplaced, had haunted me for 40 years. It was the weapon Leo had used to keep me compliant, the unspoken debt I spent a lifetime trying to repay. I stared at them, at Leo's impatient face, at Vivian's performative fragility, at the boy's defiant scowl. The memory of the hospital room, of Leo's dying wish, washed over me like a wave of fire. This was no dream. This was real. I had been given a second chance. A chance to make sure they got their wish. A slow smile spread across my face. Leo blinked, taken aback by my expression. He was expecting a fight. He was prepared for tears and arguments. Instead I stepped forward, my movements light, almost giddy. I reached for Leo's satchel and the cheap red plastic wash basin Vivian was holding, a pathetic symbol of her reduced circumstances. Of course, I said, my voice sweet and clear. Come on in. Don't be shy. We're family, aren't we? This is your home after all. The looks of utter shock on their faces were more satisfying than any victory I could have imagined. The game had just begun. The stunned silence in the kitchen was so profound I could hear the ticking of the cat clock on the wall, its tail and eyes swishing back and forth with each passing second. Leo recovered first, his brow furrowed in suspicion. This wasn't the reaction he'd braced for. He'd been ready for a battle, his arguments prepped and his indignation primed. My cheerful compliance had completely disarmed him. "Clara," he said, his voice losing its edge, replaced by confusion. Are you feeling all right?" He took a step toward me, his hand lifting as if to feel my forehead for a fever. Before his fingers could make contact, Vivian let out a sharp, delicate gasp. "Oh. Leo, my ankle, I think I twisted it on the step outside." She swayed dramatically, one hand fluttering to her brow. It was a performance so transparent it was almost laughable. But Leo, ever her gallant knight, immediately turned from me, his concern pivoting to her with practiced ease. He rushed to her side, his arms slipping around her waist to support her. "Here, Viv, lean on me. You need to sit down." I watched, the smile still plastered on my face, a mask of benign hospitality. So it began already. The little games. The constant vying for his attention. In my first life, these subtle manipulations had filled me with a silent, seething rage that I'd internalized, letting it eat away at me. Now I saw it for what it was. A pathetic, predictable dance. And I knew all the steps. AJ, oblivious to the adult tensions, saw his opportunity. With a whoop of joy, he kicked off his dirty, too small sneakers, revealing socks with holes at the toes, and launched himself onto the pristine floral quilt of our king-sized bed in the adjacent master bedroom. He began rolling around, his grubby hands smudging the clean fabric. "Look, Ma. It's huge," he shouted, his voice echoing with a glee I knew would be short-lived. In my previous life I would have scolded him, my voice tight with stress. Today I just laughed, a light, airy sound. "Let him play, Leo. He's just a boy. He's excited." I turned to Vivian, who was now perched delicately on the edge of our sofa, Leo kneeling before her as if examining a royal foot. "Can I get you some tea, Vivian? You must be exhausted from the trip." Vivian's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She was thrown. My kindness was a foreign language she didn't understand. No, thank you, Clara," she murmured, her voice a soft whisper. "I just need a moment to rest." Leo stood up, looking from her to me, his initial suspicion returning. He cleared his throat, attempting to reassert the authority my compliance had stripped from him. "As I was saying, Clara, Vivian and AJ will take the master bedroom. Her health, she needs the best rest. And the boy needs space. You can move your things to the small room down the hall." I waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be silly, Leo. There's no need for that." I walked into the bedroom where AJ was now attempting to build a fort with my good pillows. "This room is plenty big enough for all three of you." Leo followed me, his confusion morphing into frustration. "All three? What are you talking about?" I turned to him, my eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Well, of course. Vivian is in a fragile state. She shouldn't be alone at night with just a child. What if she has a spell? What if AJ has a nightmare? You're her brother-in-law. It's your duty to be here to protect and provide for them. It's the proper thing to do." I emphasized the word proper, throwing his own expected arguments back at him. His face flushed a dull red. "Clara, that's entirely inappropriate. What will people think?" I began gathering my things from the dresser. A few nightgowns, my hairbrush. "What will people think if you don't?" I countered sweetly. "That you brought your widowed sister-in-law into your home and then abandoned her to a room by herself? That you're not stepping up as the man of the family? The gossip would be terrible." I leaned closer, lowering my voice conspiratorially. "Besides, I'll hang a blanket up as a divider. For propriety's sake. Unless..." I let my sentence hang, my eyes flicking meaningfully between him and Vivian, who had limped to the doorway to listen. "You have other intentions?" Leo looked as if I'd slapped him. "How dare you?" he spluttered, his teacher's dignity deeply offended. "It's one thing to be uneducated, Clara, but must you be so vulgar?" The old insult, designed to make me feel small and uncultured, now rolled off me like water off a duck's back. I shrugged, heaping my belongings into my arms. "You knew I only finished high school, Leo. Are you regretting it now?" I didn't wait for an answer. I pushed past him, my bundle in my arms. "That flowery poetry talk of yours might impress some, but it doesn't put food on the table. People here are just trying to fill their stomachs." I marched down the hall to the small, sparse bedroom that had been our storage space. It was dusty and smelled of mothballs. Perfect. I dropped my things on the narrow bed and took a deep breath. The first move was made. I could hear their hushed, urgent voices from the master bedroom. Leo's low rumble of confusion, Vivian's higher, anxious tones. I didn't need to hear the words to know the content. She was questioning my behavior, warning him I was up to something. He was trying to reassure her while being utterly bewildered himself. Good. Let them be uneasy. Let them wonder. I spent the next hour playing the role of the impeccable hostess. I found fresh linens for their bed, the slightly scratchy ones I never liked. I put out a clean towel for Vivian, a slightly frayed one. I made a show of dragging an old heavy wool blanket and draping it over a clothesline I strung across the middle of the master bedroom. There, I announced, dusting my hands. See? Perfectly respectable. You'll be like siblings. AJ can sleep on your side, Vivian, and Leo, you can have this side. It'll be like a grand adventure for him. Leo looked at the arrangement with utter distaste. He, who loved his comforts and his privacy, was now being forced to share his marital bed with a curtain and a fidgety child. Vivian looked pale. This was not the comfortable, private sanctuary she had envisioned. She had expected to oust me, not to be forced into close quarters with Leo under my watchful, smiling eye. Her little acts of intimacy would be much harder to perform with a 6-year-old and a wool blanket as an audience. As dusk began to fall, I announced, "Well, I'm off to my brother's house for the night. You three get settled in." Leo's head snapped up. "Your brother's? Why, Clara, what is going on with you?" I paused at the front door, turning back with a smile. Vivian said she was scared to live in her house alone after Arthur died. I'm not. You clearly have everything under control here. A full house. A family. I let the word hang in the air. I'll leave you to it. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out into the cool evening air, the screen door slamming shut behind me with a final, satisfying crack. I didn't look back. I walked the familiar path to my older brother Michael's house, 2 streets over. Michael's wife, Sarah, opened the door, her face etched with concern. "Clara? What's wrong? Is everything all right?" The news of Vivian's arrival had clearly already spread. "Everything is perfect, Sarah," I said, my genuine smile startling her. "I just need a place to crash for a night or two. Leo's got house guests." She ushered me in, too polite to pry further. The house was warm and smelled of baked bread. Michael grunted a hello from his armchair where he was reading the paper. Their home was a haven of normalcy. Later, lying in their spare room on a comfortably worn mattress, I stared at the ceiling. The reality of my situation settled over me. I was back. 1980. I was 34 years old. I had no children, a husband who was in love with another woman, and a paltry part-time job at the local general store. But I also had something infinitely more valuable. 40 years of hindsight. I knew how the story could unfold. I knew the mistakes not to make. I knew where the opportunities lay. The economic reforms were just beginning. The world was on the cusp of massive change. A change I could ride to my advantage. Getting a divorce was my ultimate goal, but it wouldn't be easy. In this time, in this small town, divorce was a scandal, a mark of failure. My parents, traditional and proud, would be the first to try and stop me. I would need evidence. I would need to orchestrate things so perfectly that Leo would have no choice and public opinion would be on my side. And I knew just how to do it. I knew their weaknesses. I knew Leo's pride and his secret longing for a more sophisticated life. I knew Vivian's laziness masked by a facade of helplessness, her sense of entitlement that believed the world owed her comfort. A plan began to form in my mind, cold and precise. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would push them together alone in that house. I would remove myself from the equation entirely. I would let their own natures, their own flaws, be their undoing. And while they played house, I would start building my own empire. The general store, it was a start. But I remembered the future. I remembered the rise of supermarkets, of supply chains, of agricultural brokering. I remembered the herbs and roots people in these mountains took for granted that would later be worth a fortune to city health food stores and restaurants. I fell asleep with a grim smile on my face. The pieces were on the board. It was my move. The smell of Michael and Sarah's home, a comforting blend of coffee, wood smoke, and yeast, was a balm to my soul. For the first time in what felt like decades, I slept deeply and without dreams. When I woke, the pale light of dawn was filtering through the lace curtains. For a disorienting moment, I expected to see the sleek, modern furniture of my future home, the home I'd worked so hard to build. The sight of the simple handmade quilt and the oak dresser grounded me back in 1980. Purpose, sharp and clear, replaced the lingering fog of sleep. I had a role to play today. The role of the devoted, slightly dim and forgiving wife. I dressed quickly in a simple house dress and walked back to my house. The silence inside was palpable, thick with unsaid things. I moved quietly into the kitchen. The old avocado green refrigerator hummed its familiar tune. I opened it. The contents were meager. A pitcher of milk, a stick of butter, a few leftover boiled potatoes. And on the door 2 precious eggs nestled in their carton. Our one old hen, Matilda, was a sporadic layer at best. A slow smile touched my lips. Perfect. I got to work making noise deliberately. I clattered pots and pans, humming softly. Soon enough, the door to the master bedroom creaked open and Leo emerged, his hair tousled, his face a mask of exhaustion and irritation. He was followed by a pale and pinched-looking Vivian. AJ trailed behind them, yawning. "What's all this racket so early?" Leo grumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Breakfast," I said cheerfully, giving him a smile so bright it made him blink. "You all must be starving. Sit. I had made a simple dough soup, a thick, hearty broth with strips of dough floating in it. It was cheap, filling, and one of the few things I knew how to make well. As I ladled it into bowls, I played my part. "Leo, honey," I said, my voice dripping with a sweetness that felt alien on my tongue. I reached out and pinched his arm, a gesture of affection I hadn't made in years. "You look exhausted. You've lost weight since Arthur passed. You must be so run down with worry." Leo stared at me, spoon halfway to his mouth, utterly baffled by this sudden tenderness. In our previous life, I had been too hurt, too proud to show concern after he'd brought her here. I'd been cold and distant, which had only driven him further into her waiting arms. I'm all right," he stammered. "No, you're not," I insisted, my voice laced with fake worry. I leaned closer as if sharing a secret. "I was thinking. I'll go to the market tomorrow. I'll buy some proper eggs. You need your strength. I'll make you egg water every morning just how you like it. Lots of sugar." Egg water. A raw egg stirred into a glass of hot water with a spoonful of sugar. He'd always claimed it was for his health, a ridiculous indulgence I'd catered to for years. Leo's eyes softened. This was the care he expected. This was the language he understood. He puffed out his chest slightly. "Well, that's very thoughtful of you, Clara." I beamed at him, then rested my head lightly on his shoulder for a brief, nauseating second. "You're the only one who's ever truly cared about me," I whispered, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "You're the best." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Vivian's knuckles whiten as she gripped her spoon. Her face, usually a masterpiece of delicate pallor, was flushing an ugly, mottled red. She kept her head down, but I could see the jealousy radiating off her in waves. This was not the script she had written. She was supposed to be the center of his concern, the fragile flower he nurtured. Not me. I served AJ an extra-large portion, fussing over him. "Eat up, sweetie. Growing boys need their strength." He looked at me with suspicion but dug in hungrily. The meal continued in a tense silence broken only by the sounds of eating. I kept up the act, asking Leo meaningless questions about his work at the elementary school, pretending to hang on his every word. Each syrupy word I spoke was a calculated move, a twist of the knife in Vivian's side. Finally, she could take no more. With a sharp, sudden movement, she slammed her spoon down on the table. The clatter made everyone jump. "I'm full," she muttered, her voice tight. She scrambled down from the chair, not even bothering to put her shoes on properly, and fled the kitchen, her footsteps echoing down the hall. The moment she was gone, I dropped the act. The simpering smile vanished from my face. I stood up and began clearing the bowls, my movements efficient and cold. Leo stared at me, his confusion returning twofold. "Clara, what was that all about? What's gotten into you?" "Nothing," I said flatly, not looking at him. "I'm just seeing things clearly for the first time." I finished cleaning up in silence, then announced, "I'm going out. There's a stand of wild ginseng up in the holler I want to check on. I might be late." Leo looked like he wanted to argue, to demand answers, but he was so thrown off balance he just nodded mutely. I grabbed a woven basket and a small trowel and left. But I had no intention of digging for ginseng. I had a different mission. I walked into town to the general store where I worked a few days a week. Old Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, polishing glasses. "Clara, didn't expect you in today," he said, his kind eyes crinkling. "Just need to pick up a few things, Mr. Henderson," I said, smiling. I bought a few essentials: flour, sugar, a new spool of thread, and made a point of chatting amiably with a few other women in the store. I carefully spread the news. I was so grateful to be able to help my poor widowed sister-in-law in her time of need. Leo was such a saint for taking them in. We were all pulling together as a family. I laid the groundwork thick. Let the town see me as the generous, wronged wife. It would make what was to come so much more effective. I spent the rest of the day truly foraging not for ginseng but for other more common herbs I knew had value: yellow dock, mint, elderberries. I lost myself in the familiar physical work, the sun on my back, the smell of the earth. It was therapeutic. This was real. This was something I could control, something that wouldn't betray me. As evening fell, I didn't go home. I went back to Michael's. I shared a simple supper with him and Sarah, laughing at their stories, feeling more like myself than I had in years. I waited until full dark, until the lights in the houses along the street had winked out one by one. Then I moved. I slipped out of Michael's house like a shadow and crept back to my own. The house was dark and quiet. I moved around to the back, to the window of the master bedroom. The curtain was drawn, but there was a small gap. Just as I had anticipated. I crouched beneath the windowsill, my heart thumping not with nervousness, but with anticipation. I didn't have to wait long. I heard the rustle of sheets. A low, murmuring voice. Vivian's, pitched in a tearful whisper. "Don't know how much longer I can stand this, Leo. The way she looks at me, and today at breakfast flaunting herself." Leo's deeper voice, a soothing rumble. "Shoo, Viv, don't upset yourself. You know it's you know where my heart is. She's just being erratic. It won't last." "But she's your wife," Vivian whispered, the word a poisoned dart. "In name only," Leo replied, his voice growing closer, more intimate. "You know that. It's always been you." There was a long silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of a kiss. Then another. The bed springs creaked. A low moan. That was my cue. I moved like lightning. I ran back to Michael's house, bursting through the front door. Michael was already half out of his chair, alerted by my frantic expression. "Michael!" "Sarah!" I gasped, putting on a perfect performance of panicked horror. "You have to come. Now. There's a man in my house. With Vivian. I'm scared for her. I think she's in trouble." Michael, protective and impulsive, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fireplace poker. "Where?" "The bedroom." "Yes. I saw through the window." "Hurry." "Stay here with Sarah," he ordered, but I was already following him out the door. "I'm getting the sheriff." I lied, already veering off towards the house of the nearest authority figure, Old Man Miller, the town's respected no-nonsense mayor and justice of the peace. I hammered on his door until a light came on upstairs. "Mr. Miller. It's Clara Sterling. Please, you have to come. It's an emergency." By the time a disgruntled and robe-clad Mr. Miller opened his door, Michael had already reached my house. I heard a crash, the sound of the back window being forced open. "Perfect. What in God's name is going on, Clara?" Mr. Miller demanded. "It's Vivian. There's an intruder. Michael's gone in." I cried, wringing my hands. That got him moving. He swore and grabbed his jacket. "Show me." We rushed to my house. The back door was now open. We could hear shouting from the bedroom. Michael's angry bellows and Leo's high-pitched, panicked replies. Mr. Miller and I burst into the bedroom. The scene was exactly as I had pictured it, better than I could have hoped. Michael was standing over the bed, fireplace poker raised, his face purple with rage. Leo was scrambling naked off the bed, trying to pull the sheet around his waist. Vivian was shrieking, attempting to cover herself with a pillow, her face a mask of sheer terror. Mr. Miller took in the scene, the naked man and woman, the disheveled bed, the furious brother, and his face set into a grim, disappointed line. I played my final card. I let out a wail of despair that was only half feigned. The sheer audacity of them doing this in my bed fueled a genuine fury. I grabbed the feather duster from the corner and began laying into both of them, whipping it across their exposed backs and legs. How could you? I screamed, my voice cracking with a convincing mix of pain and rage. In my own house. In my own bed. An uncle and his sister-in-law. It's criminal. It's indecent. Leo dropped to his knees, sobbing, snot running down his face. Clara, please. I was half asleep. I thought it was you. Please don't ruin us. The lie was so pathetic, so insulting that I hit him harder. Liar. You filthy liar. Vivian just curled into a ball, weeping hysterically. Mr. Miller finally stepped forward, grabbing my arm. Enough, Clara. Enough. He looked at Leo with utter contempt. I watched you grow up, boy. To think you'd come to this. You have no shame. He turned to me, his voice gentler. What do you want to do? I took a heaving breath, looking from Leo's cowering form to Vivian's shaking body. I let every ounce of my betrayal, my 40 years of heartache, pour into my voice. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air, final and absolute. In the dim yellow light of the bedroom, surrounded by the wreckage of their affair, I saw my future beginning. The trap had been sprung. And they had walked right into it. The silence that followed my declaration was heavier than any I had ever known. It was broken only by Vivian's ragged sobs and Leo's shallow, panicked breathing. The air smelled of sweat, shame, and the faint floral scent of my perfume on the pillowcases they had defiled. Mr. Miller's face was a stone mask of disapproval. He looked from Leo, naked and groveling on the floor, to Vivian, a weeping mess in the bed, and finally to me, standing tall with the feather duster still clutched in my white-knuckled hand. A divorce, he repeated, his voice low and gravelly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of grim inevitability. Yes, I said, my voice steady now, all traces of the hysterical wife gone. I met his gaze squarely. I will not stay married to a man who brings his mistress into our home and desecrates our marriage bed while I am under the same roof. I want it done. Now. Leo looked up, his eyes wide with terror. No, Claire, you can't. My job. My reputation. Being a teacher in a small town was a position of respect. A scandal like this would end it. He knew it. I knew it. You should have thought of that before, I said coldly, when you were thinking with something other than your brain. Mr. Miller sighed, a sound of deep weariness. Get dressed, he barked at Leo and Vivian. Both of you. This is a disgrace. He turned to my brother. Michael, thank you for your intervention. I'll handle it from here. Michael, still gripping the poker, gave Leo a look of pure venom before nodding and stepping back. He came to stand beside me, a solid, protective presence. You all right, Clara? He murmured. I nodded, though I was trembling inside. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a cold, hard certainty in its wake. I will be. Mr. Miller waited while Leo and Vivian scrambled into their clothes, their movements clumsy with shame and fear. He then herded them into the living room like errant children. I followed, my head high. I'll draw up the papers first thing in the morning, Mr. Miller said to me. I'll witness it myself. Grounds, adultery. It's irrefutable. He shot a withering glance at Leo, who flinched. The house. It's in my name, I said quickly. My father, for all his traditional views, had insisted on that when we married, a rare stroke of foresight. My inheritance. He has no claim. Leo's head shot up. What? But, where will I go? That, I said, is not my problem. Perhaps your sister-in-law has room for you. The title was a deliberate, sarcastic barb. Vivian looked like she'd been slapped. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. She had no money, no skills, and now the man she'd pinned her hopes on was jobless and homeless. Her carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing. Mr. Miller left, promising to return at dawn with the paperwork. Michael stayed until they were gone, making sure Leo and Vivian didn't try anything. The atmosphere in the house was thick with hatred and despair. I didn't sleep. I spent the remaining hours of the night sitting at the kitchen table, drinking tea and making plans. The divorce was just the first step. It would free me from Leo, but it wouldn't feed me or secure my future. When the sun rose, Mr. Miller was true to his word. He arrived with a typed document. The divorce was swift and brutal. Leo signed it with a trembling hand, his face ashen. He was a broken man, his dignity, his career, his comfortable life, all gone in one night. Vivian signed as a witness, her signature a pathetic loopy scrawl. She couldn't meet my eyes. When it was done, Mr. Miller handed me the paper. It felt flimsy in my hand, that single sheet of paper, but it was the most powerful thing I had ever owned. It was my freedom. "What will you do now, Clara?" Mr. Miller asked, his voice kinder now. "I'm going to work," I said simply. I gathered a few of my things and walked out of that house for the last time as Clara Sterling. I moved my belongings permanently into Michael's spare room. Sarah fussed over me, her sympathy a warm blanket. My parents arrived later that day, their faces drawn with worry and shock. "Oh, Clara," my mother wept, clutching her handkerchief. "A divorce. What will people say? How will you manage?" My father was more pragmatic, though his disappointment in Leo was a cold, hard thing. "The fool," he muttered. "Threw away a good woman for a flutter of lace." He looked at me. "You're sure about this, girl?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said, and they could see the resolve in my eyes. They didn't understand, but they accepted it. Meanwhile, Leo and Vivian were forced to move into the tiny, dilapidated cottage that had belonged to Arthur and Vivian. It was on the edge of town, drafty and damp. I heard the gossip filter through town, amplified by my careful groundwork at the general store. The town's sympathy was firmly with me. Leo was a pariah, a moral failure. Vivian was the shameless hussy who had destroyed a marriage. I threw myself into my work at the general store with a new intensity. But I also started my real work. On my days off, I was up before dawn with my basket and my hand cart. I roamed the hills and hollows, collecting everything I knew had value. Morel mushrooms in the spring, pungent ramps, wild ginger, blackberries so ripe they stained my fingers purple. I dried herbs in the attic space at Michael's house, creating a miniature apothecary. My first trip to the city market was a revelation. I hitchhiked, my baskets carefully packed. The buyers from the health food stores and the fancy restaurants in the city paid in cash, their eyes lighting up at the quality and freshness of my foraged goods. The money I made in one day was more than I made in a week at the general store. I reinvested every penny. I bought better baskets, a sturdy pair of boots, and most importantly, a second-hand bicycle. It expanded my range dramatically. I was a woman possessed, driven by a future I had already seen. A week after the divorce, I was sorting through a batch of dried chamomile when a small, frantic knocking came at Michael's door. It was AJ, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "Aunt Clara. Aunt Clara, come quick. He's gonna kill her. My dad's gonna kill my mom." I sighed. I had no desire to ever set eyes on either of them again. But a child was involved. And a small, vicious part of me wanted to see the show. I followed AJ to the rundown cottage. The scene inside was one of utter domestic chaos. A pot of something had been knocked over on the stove, spilling onto the floor. A chair was overturned. And in the middle of it all, Leo, his face contorted with a rage I had never seen before, was standing over a cowering Vivian. "You stupid, useless woman," he was screaming. "That was our only laying hen. Our only source of eggs. And you killed it. For what? A pot of stew." On the floor between them lay a pile of brown and white feathers. In a pot on the stove I could see the pale, boiled carcass of the chicken. The smell of cheap stewing meat filled the air. Leo saw me in the doorway and his rage pivoted. "This is your fault." I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. "My fault? Did I hold the axe for her?" "You and your damn egg water," he yelled, and to my astonishment, I saw tears of frustration in his eyes. "I needed that. For my health. What am I supposed to do now?" I almost laughed. The sheer absurdity of it. His life was in ruins, his career over, he was living in squalor with a woman he was now realizing was utterly incompetent, and all he could care about was his ridiculous morning tonic. Vivian struggled to her feet. Her eye was starting to swell and a trickle of blood ran from her lip. She saw me and her humiliation curdled into hatred. "Get out," she shrieked. "I don't need you to see this. I know you're still in love with him. You're just jealous." I did laugh then, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "Jealous? Of this?" I gestured around the filthy, impoverished room. "I already threw that piece of trash out. If you want to dig him out of the garbage and call him treasure, that's your business. But don't you ever accuse me of wanting him back." To drive the point home, to shatter any last vestige of hope she might have, I decided to tell the truth. That night, I said, my voice cold and clear. When I caught you, I planned it. I knew exactly what you were doing. I wanted the divorce. You played right into my hands. The color drained from her face. She stared at me, her mouth agape, truly understanding for the first time that she had been outmaneuvered. You witch, she breathed. You're disgusting, she spat, finding her voice again. No wonder he didn't want you. He's always loved me. If he didn't, your little setup wouldn't have worked. We were shouting now, years of pent-up bitterness and rivalry boiling over. Leo just stood there watching us, a broken man caught between two warring women. Enough, he finally roared, stepping between us. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Clara, get out of my house. Whatever happens between me and Vivian is none of your business. His house. The audacity. The finality of it. Something in me snapped. The memory of his dying wish, of 40 years of being second best, of being used and discarded, surged up with a force I couldn't contain. I stepped forward and slapped him. Hard. The crack echoed in the small room. Don't you ever touch me again, Leo, I snarled. I must have been out of my mind to come here today. Remember this. No matter what happens to you two, even if you die in the street, I won't lift a finger. The betrayal and fury from 2 lifetimes fueled my arm. I slapped him again, even harder. He cried out, stumbling back, clutching his face. Blood welled between his fingers. Vivian screamed and launched herself at me. You hit my man. I was ready. I was stronger than I looked, hardened by weeks of hauling baskets and hiking miles. I caught her wrists easily and shoved her back. Try it, I dared her, my eyes blazing. I've been wanting to do this for 40 years. They both backed down, cowed by my fury. They knew they were no match for me. I had finally cut all the strings. I was free of them. Truly free. I turned and walked away from that wretched cottage, from their pathetic, crumbling lives. I didn't look back. I had a future to build. And it was going to be magnificent. The sound of my hand connecting with Leo's face echoed in my ears long after I left the cottage. It wasn't a sound of violence, but of finality. A period at the end of a long, painful sentence. A clean break. The anger that had fueled me for weeks, that had been my engine since waking up in 1980, finally began to recede, leaving behind a calm, clear-headed purpose. I walked back to Michael's house, my steps light and sure. Sarah took one look at my face, a mix of grim satisfaction and serene determination, and simply nodded, asking no questions. She handed me a cup of strong, sweet tea and I drank it at the kitchen table, making lists in a notebook. My foraging business was profitable, but it was small-scale. It relied on my own 2 hands and the limited range of my bicycle. To truly build something, to create the security and independence I craved, I needed to think bigger. The next morning I went to see old man Henderson at the general store. I found him struggling to haul a sack of flour from the back room, his face pale with the effort. Let me get that, Mr. Henderson, I said, easily hoisting the 50-pound bag onto my shoulder and carrying it to the front. He stared at me, wheezing slightly. Lord Clara, you're stronger than my best farmhand, he chuckled, mopping his brow. Mr. Henderson, I said, getting straight to the point. I want to buy the store. He almost dropped the rag. Buy it? Claire, this old place. It's barely keeping the lights on. The big supermarket they're building out on the highway, it'll put me out of business in a year. I knew that. I also knew that the big supermarket would be poorly managed, would struggle with fresh, local produce, and would fail to capture the loyalty of the townsfolk who valued personal service. But more importantly, I knew something else. I'm not thinking of it as just a store, I explained. I'm thinking of it as a collection point. I've been selling herbs and berries in the city for good money. There's a demand for what we have right here in these hills. But I can't gather enough on my own. What if we turn the store into a place where everyone could bring their forage? We could buy it from them for a fair price and I could take it all to the city to sell. You get a percentage. The whole town would make money. Mr. Henderson's eyes, faded with age, began to gleam with a new light. He was a businessman at heart and he could see the sense in it. A co-op, he murmured. A farmers and foragers co-op. Exactly, I said. And we could expand. Not just wild things. We could take orders from the city for specific things. Heirloom tomatoes, fresh eggs, handmade cheeses. We become the middleman for the whole region. We talked for hours. I laid out plans I'd been formulating in my mind for weeks. Ideas that were decades ahead of their time. Local, organic, farm-to-table. Concepts that didn't even have names yet. In the end we struck a deal. I would use every penny of my foraging savings for a down payment. He would owner finance the rest. I would run the operation. He could stay on as an advisor, a familiar face for the old-timers. We shook on it. The news spread through town like wildfire. Clara Sterling, the divorced woman, was buying Henderson's General Store. The reactions were mixed. Some thought I'd lost my mind. Others, mostly the women whose pantries my foraging had already helped supplement, were cautiously optimistic. My first official act as the new owner was to paint a bright new sign, Blue Ridge Goods and Forage Company. My second was to hire 2 young women from town, Sally and Ann, sharp-eyed sisters who knew the mountains as well as I did. I taught them how to identify and grade the most valuable plants. They became my first procurers. The system worked beautifully. Word got out that cash could be earned for ginseng, golden seal, wild mushrooms, and berries. A steady stream of people began arriving at the store with baskets and burlap sacks. Sally and Ann would weigh, grade, and pay on the spot. The store, which had been so quiet, was now a bustling hub of activity. I made the weekly trip to the city market in a borrowed truck, its bed filled with the week's harvest. My reputation grew. Buyers sought me out, knowing my goods were the best and most reliable. The money started flowing in, not in trickles but in waves. I poured it all back into the business. I bought a second-hand truck of my own, a beat-up but reliable Ford. I built drying sheds behind the store. I invested in proper scales and glass jars to display the more delicate herbs. One afternoon, as I was restocking a shelf with jars of Sarah's homemade blackberry jam, the bell above the door jingled. I turned and my blood ran cold. It was Leo. He looked diminished. His clothes were shabby and unkempt. There was a yellowing bruise on his cheekbone where I'd hit him. His eyes, once so bright and arrogant, were shadowed and hesitant. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. "Leo." I didn't smile. I didn't offer a greeting. I just waited. He shuffled his feet, looking around the store with something like wonder. The place was transformed. Clean, bright, bustling with customers. I heard you were doing well." "I am." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. I was wondering if you needed any help with the heavy lifting. Or I could keep books. I was always good with numbers." The sheer, unmitigated gall of it took my breath away. After everything. After the betrayal, the humiliation, the divorce. To come here to my place of business and ask for a job. To ask for charity. I looked at him, this pathetic shell of the man I had once loved, and I felt nothing but a distant, cold pity. "No, Leo," I said, my voice even. "I don't need your help." His shoulders slumped. "Claire, please. Things are bad. Vivian, he can't cook. He burns everything. She won't clean. She just sits and reads poetry all day. What little money I get from odd jobs, she spends it on stamps and paper, mailing her awful poems to magazines. We're starving." A part of me, the old Claire, would have softened. Would have felt a tug of guilt and offered him a bag of groceries. But that woman was gone. "That sounds like a you problem, Leo," I said, turning back to my jam jars. "Not a me problem." "She's not you," he blurted out, the words desperate, pathetic. "She's not strong like you. She doesn't know how to do anything." I turned back to him, a cold smile on my lips. "You told me on your deathbed that your love for her was everlasting. Unshakable like a rock. I suggest you go and be unshakable with her. Now if you'll excuse me, I have customers." I walked away from him, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the store, a monument to his own terrible choices. He left without another word. The encounter solidified my resolve. I was on the right path. I was building something real, something that couldn't be taken from me. My world was expanding beyond this town, beyond the memory of a failed marriage. A few days later, a well-dressed man from the city came into the store. He was a writer for the regional newspaper, doing a story on local success stories. He'd heard about the divorced woman who'd turned a failing general store into a thriving agricultural hub. He interviewed me, took my picture standing proudly in front of the Blue Ridge Goods sign. The article came out a week later, dubbing me the Forage Queen of the Blue Ridge. It talked about my business model, about empowering local women like Sally and about bringing outside money into the community. I was invited to speak at the Women's League meeting in the next county. I stood before a room of curious, skeptical women and told my story. Not the whole story, of course. But I told them about seeing an opportunity where others saw weeds. I talked about self-reliance. I saw lights go on in their eyes. I was no longer Clara Sterling, the divorced woman. I was Clara Sterling, the business owner. The entrepreneur. One evening, after a long, satisfying day, I was walking home from the store. I passed the rundown cottage where Leo and Vivian lived. The windows were dark. I could hear raised voices from within. Leo's angry shout, Vivian's shrill retort. The sound of something breaking. I didn't pause. I didn't slow my step. I kept walking towards the warm lit windows of Michael's house, towards a future I was building with my own 2 hands. Their misery was the soil from which my new life was growing. And it was fertile ground indeed. The article in the newspaper was a catalyst. Suddenly, I wasn't just a local curiosity. I was a regional phenomenon. Orders began to trickle in not just from the city, but from neighboring states. A health food store in Tennessee wanted a steady supply of dried echinacea. A high-end restaurant in Asheville requested weekly deliveries of morel mushrooms and ramps when in season. My little co-op was at the center of a growing web of commerce. The borrowed truck was no longer sufficient. I used the profits from the sudden influx of orders to buy a proper delivery van, painting Blue Ridge Goods and Forage Company, in bold, forest green letters on the side. I hired a driver, a quiet, reliable young man named Ben who'd just gotten out of the army. It freed me up to manage the expanding business. The store itself underwent a transformation. We knocked down a wall, expanding into the empty shop next door. I installed new gleaming glass-fronted coolers for eggs, milk and cheese from local dairies. The shelves were stocked with a rainbow of locally produced goods. Jars of honey, pickled vegetables, Sarah's jams, and even woven baskets made by the elderly women in town. It was no longer just a collection point. It was a destination. The women I employed, Sally and now 2 others at the checkout, walked with a new pride. They brought their paychecks home and in doing so, brought a new level of respect to their households. They were no longer just wives and daughters. They were wage earners. I saw the change in them, the straightening of their spines, the confidence in their voices when they dealt with suppliers. I was building an empire, yes, but it was an empire of women. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was pricing a new shipment of apple butter when the bell on the door jingled with unusual force. AJ stood there, his small frame heaving with sobs, his face dirty and tear-streaked. "Aunt Clara. Come quick. It's Ma. She's hurt bad." A cold dread, entirely separate from any concern for Vivian, washed over me. This was an echo from the past, a moment I had worked hard to avoid. In my first life, a similar plea had led to a child's death and a lifetime of guilt. I wouldn't let history repeat itself, not even for them. I handed the apple butter to Sally. "Line the store." I followed AJ at a run, my heart thudding against my ribs. The scene at the cottage was one of brutal domestic violence. Vivian was on the floor, curled into a fetal position, her face a mask of blood. Leo stood over her, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. A cast-iron skillet lay on the floor nearby. "She burned the stew," Leo roared, his voice cracking with a hysterical edge. "Again. The last of the potatoes. The last of the salt pork. She just sat there scribbling while it turned to charcoal. I work my hands to the bone for her and she can't even do the one thing." He saw me in the doorway and his tirade stopped. The rage on his face morphed into something else. Shame, horror, and a desperate, pathetic need for validation. "Clara. You see what I have to live with? She's useless. A useless stupid." "That's enough, Leo," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I didn't look at him. I knelt beside Vivian. Her eye was swollen shut, her lips split. She was conscious, whimpering in pain and fear. This wasn't the performative fragility she usually displayed. This was real raw terror. Despite everything, a knot of pity tightened in my stomach. No one deserved this. I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "Go to my house. Tell Sarah I need the first aid kit and a clean towel. Run." The boy took off like a shot. Leo was still standing there, breathing heavily as if waiting for me to absolve him, to tell him he was right. I stood up and faced him. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "What? This is my..." "Get out." I roared, taking a step toward him. The fury in my eyes must have been terrifying because he stumbled back, all the fight gone out of him. He turned and shuffled out the door into the fading light. I tended to Vivian's wounds as best I could with the supplies Sarah brought. She didn't speak, just cried silent tears. When she was cleaned up and resting on their ragged sofa, I sat in a chair opposite her. "You can't stay here," I said, not unkindly. She shook her head weakly. "I have nowhere to go. There are women's shelters in the city," I said. "I can take you." Her eyes widened in horror. "A shelter? With common people? Oh, never." The ingrained snobbery of her landlord class upbringing, even after all these years of poverty, was astonishing. "Then you leave me no choice," I said, standing up. "You make your bed, Vivian." I left her there. I found Leo sitting on the stump outside, his head in his hands. "If you touch her again, Leo," I said, "I will personally drive you to the sheriff's office. Do you understand me?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hopeless. "I'm not a violent man, Clara. You know that. She just makes me so mad. She doesn't do anything. She's so lazy." "You chose her," I reminded him coldly. "You chose her over a woman who did everything. Now live with your choice." I started to walk away, but his next words stopped me in my tracks. "I dream about it, you know," he said, his voice a hollow whisper. "I dream about the hospital. About the beeping machine. About what I said to you." A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air crept down my spine. I turned slowly. "What did you say to me?" He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw a glimpse of the old Leo, the intelligent, perceptive man I had once fallen in love with. "I asked you to bury me with her. I told you my love for her was everlasting. Unshakable." The world tilted. He remembered. He remembered his deathbed. The knowledge was a physical blow. Was it possible? Had he been reborn too? Was that why he had been so confused by my behavior initially? He misread my stunned silence for softening. "It woke me up, Clara," he pleaded, his voice gaining urgency. "Slapping me, it was like you woke me from a nightmare. I see it all now. No one ever treated me better than you. I've been a fool. The biggest fool who ever lived." He stood up, taking a step toward me, his hands outstretched in supplication. "I left her, Clara. It's over. We can start again. We can fix this." The offer hung in the air, grotesque and unbelievable. All the pieces clicked into place. His confusion, his attempts to chase after me, his strange comments lately. He had the memories, but he lacked the context. He remembered the end, but he hadn't lived the 4 decades of loneliness and betrayal that had led to it. He thought a simple, "I'm sorry," could erase it all. A cold, hard laugh escaped my lips. "You remember that, do you? And what do you remember me saying in return?" He blinked, confused. You were upset. You agreed." I said, "All right, Leo. Die in peace. If there's a next life, I'll make sure you two get your wish." I took a step toward him, my eyes blazing. "And I made sure you got her. I made sure you were together. This." I gestured to the squalid cottage, to his bruised knuckles, to the sound of Vivian's soft crying inside. "This is your wish. Your everlasting, unshakable love. Enjoy it." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. He understood now. My compliance, my helpfulness, my trap, it had all been deliberate. I had given him exactly what he asked for. "You planned it all," he breathed. "The divorce, you wanted it." From the moment I woke up, I confirmed, my voice icy. "This isn't a second chance for us, Leo. This is your consequence. You call yourself a man, but you have no sense of responsibility. You couldn't even keep your pants zipped, and now you want a do-over? The only reason you're crawling back now is because you see I have money. I have a life. You want me to clean up your mess again? Well, not this time." His face crumpled. It was the truth, and he knew it. "You still care," he tried weakly, a last desperate gambit. "Otherwise, you wouldn't have come today." "I came today for the child," I snapped. "And to see the show. The best revenge is living well, Leo. And you," I gave him a final dismissive glance. "You are not even worth revenge." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the gathering darkness, finally and truly alone with the devastating knowledge of what he had lost, and that I had been the architect of his ruin. I felt no triumph, only a vast and weary satisfaction. The path was clear now. His flicker of memory changed nothing. It only confirmed that I had chosen correctly. My future was mine alone. And it was stretching out before me bright and boundless. His was locked in that dark, miserable cottage. And I would never look back. Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance, painting the world in shades of gray and white. The stream behind Michael's house froze solid, and the wind howled around the eaves like a lonely animal. Inside, however, my world was warm and bright. The store was a beacon of activity and warmth, the heart of the town during the long, cold months. The encounter with Leo had left me unsettled, but it had also solidified my resolve. His fragmented memories were a ghost from a past life, an echo with no power over my present. I doubled down on my work, using the quiet season to plan for the spring expansion. I secured loans from the bank, a surprisingly easy task now that I was a respectable business owner with a featured article in the paper, and drew up plans to build a proper processing facility behind the store. I hired more women, including a few whose husbands had been laid off from the closing mill. Their gratitude was a palpable thing. I wasn't just giving them jobs, I was giving them hope, a sense of purpose that transcended their domestic roles. We started a weekly meeting, a women's business collective, where we shared ideas, struggles, and successes. The room buzzed with an energy I had never felt in my previous life. We were building something together. Meanwhile, the cottage on the edge of town became a symbol of quiet despair. Smoke curled from its chimney, but it looked lonely and defeated. Tales of Leo and Vivian's fights became town lore, whispered over coffee counters and fabric bolts. He was doing odd jobs, chopping wood, shoveling snow, anything for a few cents. She was rarely seen, a ghost in her own home. One afternoon, a few days before Christmas, Sally came into the back office, her face uneasy. "Clara, there's a man here to see you. A stranger. Looks important." I frowned, wiping my hands on my apron. "A buyer." "Don't think so. He's asking for you by name. Says it's personal." I walked out into the store. The man standing by the counter was indeed a stranger. He was tall and lean, dressed in a wool overcoat that seemed too thin for the mountain cold. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, and his face was intelligent, sharp, but etched with a deep, profound weariness. He held himself with a quiet dignity that felt out of place. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Clara Sterling?" he asked, his voice cultured, educated. "I am." He took a deep breath as if steeling himself. "My name is Dr. Alistair Finch. I'm looking for my wife, Vivian." Vivian Finch. The name meant nothing to me for a moment. Then it clicked. Finch. Not Sterling. Not even her late husband's name, which had been Miller. Finch. The pieces, the bizarre missing pieces of Vivian's past, began to tumble into place with dizzying speed. Her fear during the political purges, her desperate need to marry a safe, poor peasant like Arthur, her air of misplaced superiority. She hadn't just been from a landlord family. She had already been married. "I think you'd better come into my office, Dr. Finch," I said, my voice calm despite the storm of implications raging in my mind. I led him to the small room at the back of the store and offered him a chair. He told me his story. He and Vivian had been married young, both from prominent intellectual families. When the political winds shifted, their families were targeted. He had been sent to a re-education camp in a remote province for 7 years. They had managed one furtive, secret letter. In it she told him she was pregnant. It was the last he'd heard from her. He'd survived the camp, his spirit battered but not broken. Upon his release, he'd spent the last year searching for her, following faint trails and old connections. He'd heard a rumor she'd been in this area, that she'd married a local man named Arthur Miller who had since passed. And then he'd heard about a woman named Vivian living with a man named Leo Sterling. And he'd heard about me. "I just want to know if she's all right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to know about my child." I looked at this good, decent man, his life ripped apart by forces beyond his control, still clinging to the hope of a family he'd never known. And I thought of Vivian, who had used that child as a tool, who had lied to everyone, who had chosen the path of least resistance and greatest comfort at every turn. I knew what I had to do. It was not out of malice toward Vivian, but out of a sense of simple justice for this man who had suffered enough. "I'll take you to her," I said. The walk to the cottage was silent and tense. The Christmas decorations going up on other houses seemed to mock the grimness of our mission. I knocked on the door. Leo opened it, his face unshaven, his eyes dull. He started when he saw me, then his gaze flicked to the stranger behind me and confusion took over. "Clara? What is this? Is Vivian home?" I asked. Before he could answer, Vivian appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a dirty apron. "Who is it, Leo?" Her eyes met mine, then traveled to the man beside me. Her face for a split second showed nothing but blank non-recognition. Then, as if hit by lightning, every ounce of color drained from it. Her hand flew to her mouth. A small, choked sound escaped her lips. "Alistair." The name was a whisper, a ghost from a past she had tried to bury. Dr. Finch took a step forward, his own face a mask of anguish and hope. "Vivian. My God. Vivian." The scene that unfolded next was one of devastating revelation. It all poured out in a torrent of accusations, tears, and long-suppressed truth. Alistair, his voice breaking, asked about his child. Vivian, cornered and terrified, could only point a shaking finger at Leo. He's your son," she whispered to Alistair. Then she turned to Leo, her voice rising in hysterical deflection. "But you raised him. You were a father to him. You loved him." Leo stood frozen, his brain trying to process the seismic shift. "My son? It was mine." For a moment, a wild, impossible hope flashed in his eyes. The hope that the child he had loved and lost had actually been his blood. But Alistair shattered it. "AJ? Arthur Jr.? You named my son after another man?" His voice was laced with a pain so deep it was physical. He turned on Vivian, his composure finally cracking. "You promised me you'd take care of him. How could you let him die? I went through hell for you and that child, and you've married someone else. This is bigamy, Vivian. Do you even understand that?" The word bigamy hung in the air, ugly and final. Leo's brief hope curdled into a black, all-consuming rage. The veins on his forehead bulged. The lies, the humiliation, the years of misery, it all focused on the woman standing before him. "You," he breathed, his voice trembling with a violence I had only seen once before. "I treated you like a queen. I divorced my wife for you. I lost everything for you. And you were already married? That Jay wasn't even my brother's? He wasn't even mine? You lied to me from the very beginning." He was screaming now, his sanity snapping. He looked around wildly, his eyes landing on the cast-iron shovel leaning against the wall by the wood stove. With a roar of pure, unadulterated fury, he grabbed it and swung it. It wasn't a calculated blow. It was a blind, animalistic act of vengeance. The flat of the shovel connected with Vivian's outstretched arm with a sickening, crunching thud. The scream she let out was unlike any sound I had ever heard. A high, piercing shriek of agony. She collapsed to the floor, clutching her arm, which was bent at a grotesque, impossible angle. Blood instantly soaked through her sleeve. Alistair cried out and rushed to her side. Leo stood over them, the shovel hanging limply in his hand, his rage evaporating as quickly as it had come, replaced by stark, horrified shock at what he had done. I turned and ran. I ran to the mayor's house. I ran to the sheriff. The law arrived within minutes. The scene was one of utter chaos. Vivian was unconscious from the pain. Alistair was holding her, weeping. Leo offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led away, his face a blank mask of utter ruin. Vivian was rushed to the county hospital. The damage was too severe. Her arm had to be amputated to save her life. The scandal ripped through the town like a wildfire. It was no longer just a story of adultery and divorce. It was a Shakespearean tragedy of bigamy, violence, and long-buried secrets. Leo was charged with aggravated assault. His teaching career was not just over. It was a forgotten memory. He would likely spend years in prison. As for Vivian, when she was discharged from the hospital, she had nowhere to go. Alistair Finch, his love and hope finally and truly extinguished by the depth of her deception and the tragedy it had wrought, wanted nothing more to do with her. He left town, a broken man, to try and piece together the remnants of his life alone. Vivian simply disappeared. Some said she went to a state home. Others said she drifted to another city, a one-armed ghost from a past no one wanted to remember. She was gone. The cottage stood empty, a silent, haunted monument to the catastrophic end of a love that Leo had believed was everlasting, unshakable like a rock. It had been neither. It had been a lie built on sand, and it had collapsed, burying them both. I stood outside my store one evening, looking up at the cold, clear winter stars. The path was clear now. All the ghosts of my past had been laid to rest. The future was mine alone. The years that followed were a testament to the power of a single, unwavering decision. The silence left by Leo and Vivian's dramatic exit was filled not with emptiness, but with the vibrant, humming energy of growth. The scandal, as all scandals do, eventually faded into a dark, dusty corner of town history, trotted out only occasionally as a cautionary tale. I became neither its hero nor its victim. I became the woman who had moved beyond it. Blue Ridge Goods and Forage Company blossomed far beyond my initial dreams. The processing facility was built, a clean, modern building where women washed, sorted, dried, and packaged the bounty of the mountains. We weren't just a local co-op anymore. We were a brand. Our labels, with a simple drawing of the mountain range, began to appear on shelves in specialty stores across the southeast. I bought the land around the store, eventually owning the entire block. I built affordable housing for my employees, a radical idea that cemented their loyalty and turned the business into a true community. The Women's Business Collective evolved, formalizing into a foundation that offered microloans and business training to women throughout Appalachia. We were no longer just foraging for herbs, we were foraging for a future. I never remarried. Men came and went. A few suitors brave enough to approach a woman of my growing stature. A few business associates who saw a partnership of more than one kind. But my heart, once broken so completely, had become my own. I wasn't interested in being someone's wife again. I was Clara Sterling, and that was enough. The world outside began to take notice. I was featured in national magazines, not as a pity piece about a divorced woman, but as a pioneer of rural economic development. I was invited to speak at conferences, to advise government committees on agricultural policy. I received awards, shaking hands with governors and senators. Each handshake, each plaque was not for me, but for every woman who had ever been told she was less than, that her dreams were too big for her station. Through it all, I never forgot the past that had shaped me. It was my bedrock, my motivation. One bleak, gray afternoon, I was walking through the train station in a large city after a speaking engagement. I was dressed in a well-tailored suit, my hair styled professionally, a world away from the woman in a house dress foraging for berries. I was waiting for my train home when a commotion broke out further down the platform. A ragged, hunched figure was shuffling between the travelers, holding out a dirty cup, muttering pleas for change. He was a nuisance, and people were recoiling from him, brushing him aside with irritated gestures. As he got closer, something about the slope of his shoulders, the way he held his head, struck a chord of awful familiarity. He stopped in front of a young couple, blocking their path. "Spare some change? For a cup of coffee." The voice was a ruined, rasping thing, but the cadence was unmistakable. The young man brushed past him roughly. "Get a job, old man." The beggar stumbled back, and his eyes lifted for a second, scanning the crowd in weary defeat. They passed over me, then snapped back. They widened in a shock so profound it was almost comical. It was Leo. He was decades older than his years. His hair was gone, his face a road map of deep lines and broken capillaries. He was painfully thin, his clothes hanging off him in filthy rags. The intelligent, arrogant blue eyes were now watery and bloodshot, vacant of everything except a bottomless despair. For a long, frozen second, we stared at each other across a chasm of time and choices. I saw the recognition in his eyes, followed immediately by a shame so deep it was a physical force. He flinched as if I'd raised a hand to strike him. Then he turned and fled, hobbling away as fast as his broken body could carry him, disappearing into the crowd, a ghost swallowed by the indifferent city. I didn't follow. I didn't call out. I simply stood there watching the space where he had been. I felt no triumph, no pity, no hatred. I felt nothing at all. He was a chapter from a book I had closed long ago. The announcement for my train echoed through the station. I adjusted the strap of my briefcase, turned my back on the past, and walked toward my platform. My life was not defined by the man who had left me, or the woman he had left me for. It was not defined by betrayal or revenge. It was defined by the store I had built, the women whose lives I had changed, the community I had helped to strengthen. It was defined by early mornings foraging in the dewy hills, by the smell of dried herbs and fresh bread, by the sound of my employees laughing together. I had kept my promise to the dying man in the hospital bed. I had made sure he got his wish. He had his everlasting, unshakable love, and it had destroyed him. And I had my freedom. It had built me. As the train carried me home back to my mountains, my store, my life, I looked out at the passing world. I had been given a second chance not to change his story but to rewrite my own. And the story, I thought with a quiet, deep contentment, was only just beginning. The end.